Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's EMA exchange discussion. Today, we are answering questions. We've had lots of questions around tech and what tech can help us with our virtual events. So we are discussing sort of all things tech in this new lockdown situation that we find ourselves in. As always, I'm not going to spend too much time chatting because I'm going to hand over to Martin, who will introduce our wonderful panel. Please remember, we do have a Q&A function, so you can send in questions. There's also the chat function, so please feel free to use it. And we will do our best to get around to your questions. And if we don't, I will ask the panel to answer them afterwards. Anyway, I am going to hand straight over to Martin Fullard, the editor of Conference News and fantastic event industry champion. Martin, over to you.
Thank you, James, for the warm introduction, and good morning, everybody. Just to reiterate, I am Martin, editor of Conference News magazine, and I'm delighted to be joined by such an esteemed panel. I'll ask them to introduce themselves in just a second. I just wanted to say that we're talking about event technology today and the options, what's out there, the questions you want to have answered, but we do not personally endorse any one product. So any product names that we mention, of course, there are others available. No one here is receiving any commissions that I'm aware of. Okay, panel, so I'm going to ask you now to introduce yourselves, and we'll go clockwise as you appear on the screen in front of me. So Stephen, please.
My name's Stephen Nash. I work for Blitz GES, and I joined the company to head up the Manchester Central venue, which is now a Nightingale Hospital. So the actual activity that's happening in there at the moment is not event-based. And so my focus has switched very much over to virtual, hybrid, and digital events.
James.
My name is James Morgan. Some of your members know me because I've spoken at some of your live events before. I'm a principal lecturer in event design and technology at the University of Westminster, and I run the Event Tech Lab, which is a global community of startups.
Adam.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Yes, my name is Adam Perry. I'm the editor at Event Industry News and also a co-founder at Event Tech Live and the Event Technology Awards.
And we're also joined this morning to throw in the curveballs, Richard Waddington.
Hi, everyone. Well, hopefully most people out there know me. I'm Richard, founder and chair of EMA, your industry association. And yeah, I'm just going to sit here and listen to the guys, and every now and again throw the curveball in that I feel we need to sort of focus on and stuff like that. Cheers, Marty.
Okay, so the first question I'm going to ask all the panelists to contribute to, and James, I'm going to ask you to kick us off, is obviously digital events, they've burst onto the mainstream. I mean, are they realistically going to replace the live experiences that we all enjoy and get involved with, or can we expect more hybrid solutions when we emerge from this COVID-19 crisis?
Let's look at the data. So I don't know if anybody joined the Global Meetings International Day last week, but there was a Slido poll run with just over 7,000 planners from around the world. And the most popular choice for the way that the industry is going to progress is with hybrid events in the short term. So that was at about 70% of people said that they would prefer to offer a hybrid event, which I think kind of indicates where the thinking of the industry is going.
Adam, what about you? What are your views on us going forward as an industry?
I agree. I think there's going to be a hybrid model. Some of the organisers I'm talking to at the moment, their eyes have been opened actually to the opportunities and advantages that virtual events present them, both running them alongside face-to-face events, but also independently where sustainability may be a better option to go virtual, or an event that might have not worked in capacity would be better to actually be delivered virtual. The one thing that I think nobody's talking about at the moment is the barrier to entry has dropped quite drastically to become, let's say, an event organizer. Any company now can purchase a license to a virtual event platform or Zoom, etc., and put on their own virtual event and market that out, retarget people through social media, etc. And actually, I think that's possibly one of the threats to some of the existing event organizers, is that new competitors pop up in their space, potentially offering a free version of what was paid by them, or actually having more resource to market that and capture mindshare. So a little bit like the blockbuster Netflix analogy of, existing company, very well founded, had a great business, and then new competitor comes into play with a different way of thinking, a different attitude towards things, and a different way of delivery, and actually takes that existing player out of the business. So that's one of the things that I think I've not really seen anybody else talk about, but I see as a potential threat.
That's really interesting. We might circle back round to that. Stephen, what about you?
Well, it's a staged approach at the moment. I mean, at the moment, we're only able to have virtual events, and certainly for the foreseeable future, until they relax the law on us being able to have group gatherings, it's all virtual. But then I think once the lockdown restrictions are taken out and we're able to have smaller events, you'll start to see better produced virtual events for a start, in that we're able to send out film crews, we're able to produce better content, not just webcam. And then beyond that, I think we're looking at a hybrid solution for the majority of events that will be out there. But I think that's a very positive thing. I think there's a lot of things that hybrid adds to events that we've not been seeing on events, reaching out to wider audiences, and adding in a lot more opportunities for sponsorship and for other content to be shared online before it happens.
Interesting stuff. So do you think, guys, I'll come back to you individually, has the rush to create digital alternatives highlighted, I guess, how ill-prepared perhaps a lot of organisations were? Has it completely forced a strategy rethink? I mean, what does this mean, I guess, for the future of budgets? Is there a risk to spend on live events if the digital alternative is viewed as cheaper? I mean, is this going to really be decided by the drive for ROI, if you like, or the bottom line? James, I'm curious for your view.
Okay, so that's kind of two-part question. So we're talking about the experience, the online experience, but before that, the kind of the types of events that are being organised. So the kind of the classic virtual event like we're experiencing right now is just talking heads, and I think it comes back to the point that was made earlier by Stephen, that we're looking at the way virtual events are going to be designed. So the barrier to entry to do an event like this is pretty low. But to do something like Ericsson, the phone company, or the data company, they have a full-on studio in Stockholm, and they broadcast and they do events for 5,000 or 6,000 people regularly around the world once a week, using studio, using talking heads, using video, using different content types to create an experience rather than just a talking heads kind of lower barrier kind of type virtual event. And then that kind of begs the question about, so how do we design those events? Because when we design an event for live, we always look at what is going to be that touch point experience. What are the sequences that are designed within a live event? And how does that pan out over the day, a half-day conference, a product launch or whatever? But where we are now, we're very much at the talking head stage, because the skill set of most agencies, especially smaller agencies, people are doing kind of any types of business events that they can do without a broadcast department, without the AV. Smaller agencies are going to revert to the talking head, the easy fix to get something up and running straight away for their clients. Whereas if you look at a company like DRPG, where they've got broadcast facilities and in their house, they can make a much bigger deal out of that event and create a much better viewing, a more immersive experience. And then that all comes back to sensory design, for example. But that's another point that we could discuss later.
If you know it's all seen as a cheaper option, do you think event managers are going to find it harder to get budget to run live events?
Well, no, because I think people are sensible in the fact that they know that live has costs, so catering costs, venue costs, AV, other technology costs. So I think people can see the value in that, and they do want to meet face to face. We're social animals, but there are options and alternatives. It's a pick and mix approach, really, the kind of hybrid idea. And in terms of the design, you can actually have quite expensive virtual events, depending what I call a blended approach. So here we've just got a single faceted approach with the talking heads. But if we've got a blended approach, we could be bringing in video. We could be going more down the sensory route, where what we do is we organize a talk at lunchtime, and we'll say to people, okay, when you register for this event, you get sent a code for Just Eat, so you can get a takeaway delivered to your door. And then we can go even further with delegate packs that might have a function where you make a model, where there's a half-hour yoga class that you can do at home. So we can create, more sensory experiences through virtual, but so people have tangibles within their house or their office to be able to play around, and they feel that there's an element of life to it, although you don't get that collective intelligence thing going on.
Adam, what are your thoughts?
I'm more positive in the sense of, I think we should consider the fact that actually budgets for events and virtual events could go up, right? So if we stop thinking about we are going to take away from an event budget, there is most brands, most organizers have, or most attendees for an event as well, have a digital marketing budget as part of their strategy for their business, right? Virtual could be very much aligned with the same metrics and ROI that is seen from a virtual event, from a digital campaign, let's say a pay-per-click campaign, a Google AdWords campaign, a Facebook campaign, etc. And actually the opportunity that presents us as the events industry is we could tap into that budget and acquire that budget as part of our event strategy. So I think there's a positive spin out of it, that if we align our virtual event offering in the same way that digital offers advertising and reach, then we are going to be going into a different pot of money with certain companies not necessarily eroding their physical face-to-face event budget. If that can also be tied up with a physical face-to-face event as a hybrid solution, I think there's an opportunity to gain even more revenue from a single source of income or a single prospect than has been presented before.
That's really, really interesting point. Stephen, I see you nodding in agreement. You got what's your view to add?
I think Adam's right. I think there's definitely an added advantage of having a virtual platform, and certainly where it supplements the live element of shows. But I think the idea that the budgets of live events is going to be something that evolves over time. The events of virtual, the budgets of virtual events is something that's going to be evolve over time, depending on the type of event. And I think a lot of people are going to decide to run events similar to this, little webcasts, but the audience engagement isn't going to be high. We're going to have very detailed statistics about who's watched what, when they've watched it, when they turned it off, what they engaged in, and so on and so forth. And I think actually the real key is going to be the focus on the content, the messaging, and I think creating an actual narrative that works throughout the event is going to become a lot more important. And that involves creative teams, it's going to involve production teams. And I think to effectively communicate your message, the focus of where you're spending your money is going to change.
Can I just interject there about the engagement? I think if the virtual event is well designed, actually you can get engagement levels up. So I'll give you an example. There was, as I was talking about the GMID virtual event last week, they were using Slido polling throughout. And actually, there were 7,000 people on some of those polls. So you can actually say, well, if we've got 7,000 people engage on Slido out of 10,000 viewers or whatever it was, we got a 70% engagement level. So you can actually measure in numerical engagement. So, but measuring physical engagement or emotional engagement are completely different things. So engagement measuring is possible, but the sophistication of that measurement can be problematic, because you can't actually, I suppose you could measure physical, like if you said everybody out a model and said, everybody make this model and see what kind of model you get, and then take a photo and upload it to Instagram, and then we'll show our Instagram feed in one of the windows on Zoom, for example, then you can see engagement there. So maybe there is a way to measure engagement, but I think that's an interesting thought of how do we design engagement into virtual meetings.
I guess that's something that might, yield a bit more in our next question. So I'm going to skip along, and Stephen, I'm going to come back to you. I mean, approaching the design of a digital event, is this something that an organizer can handle alone, or what partners are going to be needed to deliver a successful digital or hybrid event? And perhaps what questions should our audience be asking of these partners?
Can they design their own event? Well, yes and no. I think for very simple kind of talking head kind of events such as this, I think there's a lot of platforms out there that will allow you to do this and to do it relatively easily and engage with the audience. I think when you're getting into things that are a little bit more complicated, I think having producers and directors to help you design the content is really, really important. I mean, we've been event organizers for decades and probably centuries between us. So, there's a skill set that comes with that, and that's engaging audiences, how to translate your message into something that people are going to actually listen to. So I think it's just going to be depending on the type of event, it's going to be whether they can use it themselves or not. I mean, the type of questions, I mean, I've written a bunch of questions for type of things that people should be asking tech companies. I think one of the key ones is how is your event supported by anybody during the event taking place or into the lead up, and a lot of the platforms that are out there, there's some that are designed by the organizer. So if you buy into a platform, you design the platform yourself, places like Vimeo, for example, or Glisser, or those type of platforms. What is the lead time to create a virtual event platform? I mean, I think it's going to be a longer lead time to create these events, mostly. And also looking at features that allow additional audience participation. What's included in it? How does that work? What statistics do I get from that? One of the key questions I think that they should be asking companies is how many streams are you able to run? I think a very simple event platform such as Zoom, it's a single stream event. But when we're getting into much more complicated events, you'll have multiple streams, multiple rooms, virtual exhibition spaces. And I think there you're relying on people from the events industry to be able to push you in that direction.
Interesting. Adam, I'm curious to hear your thoughts there. Maybe if you've got any experiences from Event Tech Live. I mean, if you're bringing a partner in to help, some sort of digital version of your event or something like that, you're obviously going to be the man to speak to. What's your view?
So my view is that, if I'm honest, I think the biggest amount of budget that any organisation is going to invest in virtual events is actually going to be the production, the storytelling, the delivery of that, and the technical support that wraps around that, just like Ash has said. that's what our industry is paid for anyway. You know, anybody can organize an event. The barrier to entry to actually organize any type of event, again, is very low. You can hire a venue, you can bring suppliers in, and off you go if you're confident enough. And that's what makes our industry great. Creative people can get into it and deliver an event. But essentially, the professional sector of the events industry, we are paid for our creativity, our knowledge, our network, our experience. And that's what makes these larger events and these professional events those experiences. Technology companies in the event space are going to have very healthy businesses, because not only are some new platforms popping up that obviously are building and tailoring their platform to deliver the best experience online. I'm not going to mention any names at this moment, but then in addition to that, a number of existing suppliers have also found ways that they can quickly support their customers and their clients with virtual offerings. So they're not necessarily having to go out and buy additional products and services, etc., which again supports budgets and delivery and support, etc. And I think one of the biggest things our industry is just getting to grips with is the experience of setting these platforms up, managing them, planning them, and delivering them. And again, that's where budget needs to be spent in terms of bringing experienced people in to take all that heavy lifting away from people, and you know, for a corporate, make it a super smooth process, and no headache really.
James, did you want to add something to that?
I think Adam's right in terms of how these platforms, the existing platforms, have pivoted to offer their clients virtual. We've seen that in a couple of products. But I think what we need to do is, I think we need to also make a differentiation, because the EMA members are involved in both internal events that can be quite large, as well as external facing events. And then it's like looking what is going to be the right design for those different virtual events. Internal events might, you know, a small meeting for 20 people might be fine on a talking head basis. But when you've got more consumer or external facing events, you might have to go the whole hog with the, you know, to try and create a toolkit, immersive toolkit experience for people. So there are different approaches depending on the event type. I think that there are so many platforms now pivoting. We see them every day, don't we, Adam, in the news? So what we're left with now is too much choice, maybe. For example, a Google Meetup, you can do a webinar to 100,000 people now, and you can use that free of charge if you subscribe to Google. I mean, that's phenomenal. So it depends really on the event type and how you're going to configure that and get you know, maximum engagement, I think.
James, I'm going to stick with you and add into this the question of cybersecurity. And those people watching the news may have heard yesterday or this week that Zoom is actually being sued. Hopefully they're not listening to us now for sharing personal data. But, you know, this cybersecurity is something that, in my view, is, even before all this happened, is something that I think has always been a bit of a misunderstood concept to events. I don't think people pay serious enough attention to it. I mean, can you give us any idea on what questions perhaps an organizer should be asking of a supplier, be it a free online platform or an event tech partner, on cybersecurity and making sure their delegates and their data are safe?
Yeah, I mean, just a tip for Zoom. They have had problems with security. And normally, because people aren't using the security code. So what Zoom have actually done now, they've actually required people to send out passwords to enter meetings now. So you have to untick that if you want a more public, easier way to join up. But I think in terms of security, it depends on the event type again. So let's take a bank, because EMA has bank members. They would probably want to run those events in a very closed loop in terms of the security that they need, in terms of the sensitive data that's going to be discussed or shown within those meetings. So cybersecurity is probably the major consideration, is to keep that data as safe as possible. But then when we go to more kind of consumer-facing events, less security may be required. We know that already facial recognition software works online, so that could work in the registration process. There's a couple of companies that actually use your webcam to validate you as an attendee to go into as a security measure. So that could actually have an API connected to a registration process or some kind of a way of validating who should be online in that event. Using voucher codes, security codes, all those things I think are a great idea to make sure we don't get the, as we've seen in the news today about child abuse images being piped into Zoom meetings, for example.
Yeah, it's a big question. Stephen, have you got anything to add to that from your perspective?
I think one thing that is the big difference between virtual and live people is the presentations, particularly for financial institutions, is that the data shown at events is quite often confidential, but once you make it virtual, it exists online. And I think there's going to have to be some kind of process as to working out how that information is shown. If it's recorded, if it's available to other people, is it downloadable, and how that actually works. But I think that's a question that is largely going to be asked of legal teams of companies rather than to the event organisers themselves.
I mean, certainly the event organizer is going to have to at least make the case to their employer that everything is in hand. Adam, I mean, this is something that I think we can't underestimate. Cybersecurity, in your view, please.
Just before that, if anybody hears my little one in the background kicking off, I do apologise. Working from home. Okay, so there's a couple of practical tips that I'd like to offer everybody here. Ask for copies of terms and conditions, privacy policy, data processing. Any technology or SaaS platform should have these in place. If they can't pony that up, don't use them. Ask them where their servers are based and what server data policies they hold. Zoom, for example, now allows you to choose in which region your data is held. There is a default, but there's an option there. So I think it's very important for that. And speak to professionals. There are, as we do health and safety, right? We employ health and safety people who know exactly what the legalities are of delivering a face-to-face event. Cybersecurity is no different to that. In fact, it's probably on the same level as health and safety. So there are professionals out there like Data Oversight, Helen Beveridge, and others that will help and guide you through the best way to manage your attendees' data, your own cybersecurity, and make sure that you are limiting your risk wherever possible. Another practical tip for high sensitive information, for high sensitive registrations, if there is any fear of data leakage, there are great platforms like Anon, which allows you to create anonymous email addresses that are forwarded to your customers so that their original and personal or corporate email is protected, and you can help manage that for those registrations. So another great way to put levels of protection in place that don't cost anything. They just cost time. It's all about preparation when it comes to cybersecurity. Expect the unexpected with it, because data is the most valuable thing on this planet, and people will do anything to get hold of it.
Great. Okay, I'm now going to start moving into our audience questions. Now, there are obviously many that were sent through to us in advance, and we'll try to get through a few of those. But to our audience, you'll see the Q&A function on your screens. If you do have a question for the panel, please do jump in and post your question there. And I'm going to fire you guys a question from Laura Williams. Now, it was actually one of the questions I had prepared before, but she says, what's everyone's thoughts on virtual coffee breaks and how these can be done effectively to maximize valuable delegate interaction and networking? I think one of my questions was, networking, how do we kind of replicate it on a digital platform? Stephen, maybe we could start with you.
We've seen some very interesting coffee break solutions. Gamification and competitions is something that particularly works with my kind of line. I'm a bit of a gaming geek myself. Introducing some sort of game that people can play. They see scoreboards, maybe a prize at the end of it. Something to keep people engaged during that time, stopping them from walking away and doing something else, being distracted. So yeah, I think that's quite an interesting idea for that kind of thing.
James, what about you?
Well, I'm going to go back to my idea of actually sending something tangible to people for their coffee break. So do you know the difference between the different types of coffees, like Colombian, Arabica? You know, you could almost do a coffee tasting. You could send people little sachets that can actually mix up and smell while they have their coffee break. So just make it more sensory.
Funnily enough, I actually received a text from a friend of mine who runs a wine tasting events company locally, and he texted me yesterday to give me a shopping list of all the wines I need to go and buy for a virtual wine tasting event next week. So I'll be doing that. Adam, I'm going to come to you with the next question, and that's from Paula De Brito. She asks, can you give us an example of a good blended event, a hybrid event, I think we're calling it, which has incorporated both face-to-face and digital? Is there any experiences you've had that you can share?
Unfortunately, not at the moment. Not what I would class as a good example as well. I'm going to be totally honest with people. However, I do think there are some coming up which are from face-to-face organisers, which I think are great examples of how they're going to deliver things virtually. SaaStock is one. SaaSta is another. There's Collision. There's a number of these coming up, which I think are great examples of how they're tackling virtual, and then follow those along to see how they then blend them. They come from a digital background, so they're absolutely going to have a hybrid virtual kind of platform going forward. But yeah, unfortunately, at this moment in time, a good blended event, there's none existing currently because we can't have face-to-face events, and there wasn't many great ones in the past.
I've got a good example actually, Martin. A guy called Aaron Kaufman, who's based in Toronto, runs an events company, and Dalia El-Ghazar, who works in Boston as an event technologist. They did an event a couple of years back called Control-Alt-Delete, and that was a global event. So they had hubs in Amsterdam, London, Chicago, and that was online and in the room. And that was very, very successful, with a couple of thousand people online for that event and a couple of hundred people in each room in Amsterdam, London, and Chicago. So they do work. And I think Richard's got some.
Yeah,
he has.
If I
Yes,
could just jump in and say, the biggest one out there in my world is TED Talks. They started as live events for a very close community, and now it's totally open to people. Watch miles of history. Some are just live, some are live, and some are just online, some are live, but the whole world is a mix.
Okay, I've got a question here from the interestingly named anonymous attendee. Stephen, I'm going to fire this one at you. Let's see if you've got an answer. If not, no worries, we'll move on. What is considered the norm when it comes to charging for virtual events? Is there an industry standard, e.g. the average cost for a 3-hour virtual event is X?
I mean, this is largely going to depend on the content and what you expect people to get out of the event. I think if you feel that the value of the content that you're producing for people is worth the same amount as it is of them being in the room, then I don't see any reason whatsoever why you wouldn't charge the same for the event. However, I guess things like product launches and other things, you're wanting the audience to engage with you without charge because you're trying to promote a product to them. So I think it's largely going to be dictated by the type of event that it is. And it may be that for the larger events, when we get into the hybrid market and we're able to do these hybrid events, that a reduced fee is offered for the people who are engaging online. It may help. I mean, I suppose you're not providing them with the services that they have when they're at the venue, for example, catering and so on and so forth. So it'll be a good way of expanding audience sizes to basically bring more and more people into your event.
Now we've got questions from Heather Cook and Christopher McCarthy here, and they're fairly similar questions and similar to what we had sent in advance. I think they're asking the panel for just some tip-offs really about some names of products and platforms out there suitable for online events. Now, of course, we don't endorse any product or company we might name, but Adam, maybe we can start with you. Are there any tip-offs you've got for the audience?
I think it's really important to start off with, we need to understand the objective of the event, the size of the audience, etc. If you are looking to do something like this with some interactivity, there are well-founded companies like Slido, Glisser, Vivox, etc. that can bring functionality in. They're partners with Blitz as well to enhance and just create a little bit more engaging than what currently is there with chat and Q&A with Zoom. And gives you lots of data that you can export as well. So they're great options if you're kind of doing something like this, but you want to enhance the level of that. Going up from there, if it becomes what I would call a fully dubbed virtual event, which exhibition organisers are looking at the moment, it's companies like Hopin, Hey Summit, iVent is a or everything under the sun platform. But obviously, as you increase in those levels of functionality, features, and sometimes marketing automation for you, so does the budget requirements and time invested in actually setting that up. I think that's super important to make everybody aware that's listening today is these things aren't set it and forget it. They take time invested to set things up. I'm connected with some very, very experienced event organisers, and they've been caught out because they've not given themselves enough time to set these things up. So there are lots. I have a post on my LinkedIn, which I am going to look at updating, which has a list of people. And to be honest with you, there are existing event technologies that are every single day coming out with a virtual option. So if you've already invested in, let's say, an events case or an Attendify or a C-Event, if you already have license fees with them to deliver your registration event website and other event content management opportunities, speak to them first because your team is familiar with that platform, and the proposition of going from them to a virtual or hybrid solution will be much easier because you won't necessarily have to learn new things, set new things up. So I would definitely go back to your current suppliers on event tech and just chat to them first.
And Adam, it's Richard. You published a paper or a book or something recently on, you've reviewed all of the platforms that were out there, and if I'm right, can we share that through, again, promote that out, share that to our membership?
Yeah, we've got a number of resources, number of pieces of content, guides, all that kind of stuff. There's others out there by Event Manager Blog. There's a number of other things as well. So I would say absolutely take the time to digest that information, but most importantly, figure out what you want to do first, because you don't necessarily need to invest 5, 10, 15K on a platform, depending on what you want to actually achieve out of it. Zoom is very cost effective. Even Slido has a free option that would work well in this kind of scenario. So think about budgets. And when it comes back to ticket pricing, think about if you have cost savings, maybe pass that on to the attendee, or even more so, what would you do if somebody gave you 25% extra event budget in terms of design and delivery, and do what James does and kind of incorporate that as well. So just take the time to kind of figure out what you want to do first, I think.
James, you have the last word.
Okay, couple of things. This month's exhibition news, there's a 2-page article in there on some meeting platforms and exhibition platforms, and some of them do both. Some of them do meetings, some of them do expos, so you can have a look in there. There's also one in terms of you guys in EMA that are looking for closed loop solutions. There's a platform called Jitsi, and it's a free open source video conferencing solution, and you can actually download that and put it on your own servers. So there's no need to go outside of your organization's data control security area. So that could be an option that you could look at as well.
Adam, go. We'll let you have one word in before I hand back to James.
I have one more tidbit. Podcasting, in terms of delivering content, is a great way to engage our audience. It's very sponsorable. The distribution platforms are massive. There's less competition than, let's say, YouTube, etc. It's easy to record offline. There's no necessarily, unfortunately for Blitz, there's no big AV setups and all those kind of things. Audio is key, so still get those guys involved in obviously that side of things. But it's not uncommon, it's not unheard of for paid podcasts to be a revenue stream for independent publishers now, right? Private podcasts, Patreon style. I'm happy to pay for this. And it's a great way to deliver content to your audience because their attention span is there as and when they're ready to. It could be on a run, it could be cleaning the dishes, it could be commuting, etc. Very digestible, very repeatable, goes back to it. And you can absolutely monetize a podcast as a content delivery option, as a virtual event. It doesn't necessarily have to have video.
Great. Okay, panel, thank you so much. That was really insightful. And I'm going to hand back to James. Thank you, James.
Thanks, Martin, and thank you everybody for joining us. Thanks, Stephen, James, Adam. Really interesting discussion. I really enjoy these Thursday morning. I know, Adam, you don't like the term webinar, do you? I like these Thursday morning discussions, and that was really interesting. And if there are any questions that haven't been answered, I'll put them out to the panel afterwards and send them out. And I'm going to call myself out, actually. I've been slow at getting the video out for these, and I do apologise. I will be getting a video out later today for this one. That's my goal for the day. But thank you. If anyone wants to suggest topics for us, please feel free to send suggestions and ideas to James at ema-uk.com. We're doing these every week. I'll be releasing for our members what our weekly schedule is looking like for the next few weeks. And we also have next Wednesday, we have our EMA Wellbeing webinar, which we do every week, our Wellbeing webcast. Stop using the word webinar while Adam's online. And on this Friday for EMA members, we are running a virtual yoga session if anyone wants to do some yoga. And the details for that are on the website. Richard, have you got any final comments?
Yeah, no, please, if I can. People are asking questions here. There's lots of chat on the sidebar. If I can remind members that James has set up a WhatsApp group. If you join that group, that's a way of collaborating. There's much more collaboration now going on within the community, which is great to see. People asking, what have you used? How are you using it? So there was someone the other day talked about WebEx and that they were really happy with what that was delivering to, I think, a 300, 400 audience, which was sort of quite complex with breakout sessions and stuff like that. So again, it is all about collaborating. And I think if we look at where we are in phases, we are still in crisis mode. You know, the shit has hit the fan, excuse the pun. We are reacting and searching and trying to work out how to get through this. So just think that that's the phase that you're in at the moment. Things will settle a little bit, and I think I can start to see things settling. And we then start to go into planning and doing more research and evolving more about what we do and how we use technology and integrate that into our plans going forward. So at the moment, we're in a very reactive situation, but then we'll start to move as we gain more knowledge, talk to professionals, talk to people that are out there, your supply chain, and your agencies, and find people that really do know what they're talking about, have been in TV production. There's a lot more to this than a live event, and then you'll get a greater breadth and depth of it. So yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Richard. Once again, thank you to our panel, Stephen, James, Adam, and Martin for moderating. Thank you very much for everyone who's tuned in, and we will be sending this out later today as a video. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks, James. Thanks, guys.